Everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Get Wealth podcast. Super excited about this episode, and I'm super excited that you're watching this right now because I know this podcast has absolutely changed my life. I've learned so much. I get to talk to the coolest people like the guest I have on today, Lou Soriano. He's a certified financial planner. I know it might seem like all the podcasts I'm doing now are with real estate, but I actually do want to learn the rest of the stuff. And Lou, you got the background in financial planning, and that's a big part of building wealth. So I'm excited, man. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this since we exchanged a couple of messages about a week ago, and I know we had to reschedule for today. I appreciate that, and I'm honored to be a guest on your show.
Yeah, well, here we are. So let's just jump right into it. So let's just start off with a little bit about yourself and kind of what your background is and how you got to be a financial planner. Is that something you always wanted to be?
No. Here by trade for engineering, did that for quite some. I got interested in investing in the stock market, and as a result, I started learning more and more. My uncle, who happens to be an accountant, told me I should go and get licensed. I did, and one thing led to another, and it became sort of something that was a hobby for myself, turned into a side gig, which eventually turned into a full-blown business. So took a long time for that transition to happen. You know, it evolved that way over many years. And now I am a CFP, a certified financial planner, for 15 years or so. And I love working with people and helping them understand, you know, things like the stock market and taxes and S corporations. So it's the kind of stuff I talk about all day.
Yeah, I'm so glad there's people out there like you, because I think it's an area that we neglect to learn about at an early age. You know, it's such a huge part of your career or your day-to-day life, but you don't learn anything about it growing up, taxes or starting a business, or just the vast variety of things that you can get into with personal finance. So I'm glad there's people out there like you that are able to provide some direction and step in that area. And that's what I'm trying to do, is learn about that and kind of fill the gaps in my knowledge. So with a topic like this, where does somebody even begin to start learning about personal finance, and like what's a good place to start? Is it froze? Could you hear any of that?
Well, I can hear you. Can you hear me, Kay? I got you.
Sorry.
Are you there?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. That's okay. Sorry if there's a bad connection here somewhere, but I started learning about this stuff on my own. And I think, unfortunately, that's the way a lot of people do learn about things like this, because it's not something that's taught in school. And it's not until you get into this kind of thing, like you are now with your real estate investing, that you start to become aware of some of the things related to the business that you are interested in. And it almost doesn't matter what type of business you are in or are interested in. At some point, you're going to start learning about, hey, there's taxes that need to be paid. There's advantages to being set up as, let's say, a business structure like an LLC or an S corporation. There's advantages to having retirement plans. So all these things really we start to learn in real life. You know how they say, like, there's the stuff you learn in school and then there's the things you learn in real life. Unfortunately, these are the things that are not taught in school and taught in real life. And I've been excited to share some of this stuff with this younger generation, like yourself. I have a son who's about your age. He's a realtor, and I work with a lot of young entrepreneurs, and I get excited about sharing this type of information with them.
That's awesome, man. I'm excited to hear about it. So take someone, like myself, or maybe someone listening who hasn't prioritized personal finance, what's step one? Is it getting an emergency fund? Is it investing somewhere? Where do you start?
Well, it's hard to say. It's different for everyone. And it, like somebody like you or somebody who's wants to start investing, let's say in real estate. Um, yeah, ideally you would like to have some sort of emergency fund.
Mhm.
Typically that should be anywhere from 3 to 6 months of expenses. Then of course you want to have some money set aside for taxes, and investing in yourself, whether that be through your business or through a retirement plan if you're thinking that far ahead in the future, which is a wonderful idea, especially when you consider the effect of compounding. And if you have something like a Roth IRA that's going to be tax-free at retirement, the earlier you start, the better off you'll be. But I think to answer your question, no matter if you have a 9 to 5 or you're starting a business, you probably should have some money set aside as sort of like a rainy day fund or an emergency fund. And I would recommend 3 to 6 months of expenses if possible. After that, if you're in business for yourself, probably investing in your business would be the next best option, just to kind of scale and fast track getting that off the ground, whether that be through investing in education or actually investing in a business in some capacity, some other capacity. That's what I would recommend.
I really like that you said that because I've interviewed other people on here, and just from talking, it seems like there's this progression of you save an emergency fund, then you max out your Roth IRA or whatever it is, and then you just contribute to your work one after that. And then over the next 60 years, you eventually have enough that you can live off of 8% of it. And to me, that just seems really stale. I'm not, I don't like how that sounds. Whereas like what you're saying is there's certain things that you should check the box on, an emergency fund if things happen, but then investing it into yourself at an early age. That's the part that gets me excited, because I think
Yep.
that's really how you build true wealth. And yeah, sure, you might be able to build security, but I don't know if that's really what it's all about. Like I like the fact that putting all the rest into your own thing in the beginning. Is that, because that's not necessarily the standard. That's not what you hear from most like financial advisors, right?
No, and I'll tell you, if I spoke with you 20 years ago, my advice may have been what you have been told, because that was the advice I took, and that was the path. I have no regrets, but the world was different 20, 30 years ago. Now things are so much different just through the cell phone. You and I met through Instagram,
It's so
and
cool.
you're on the other part of the country, and here we are talking where we would have never had that opportunity 20, 30 years ago. You can scale much faster through social media, through branding, through social media. So there's so many things that can be done now that weren't possible years ago. So I think that advice about, setting aside a little nest egg for yourself, and then, maxing out retirement plans and doing all these things, getting all your ducks in order, so to speak, and then starting a business was the roadmap years ago. That was the roadmap I took. It's much different now, much easier now. And that old roadmap still works, but I think it's just going to take a lot longer to get to where you need to be, given the environment we're in today.
Yeah, I agree. And do you think that changes a little bit if you're not entrepreneurial minded in any sense, where you don't have something to invest in yourself? Like, for example, for me, it would be just pouring it all into real estate and building a business with that. Whereas someone who works a 9 to 5 job, where do you recommend them investing that in themselves if they don't have like a little, project?
Right. So first off, after 2020, I almost recommend that everybody should have a side gig, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily a side business, but a side gig, something that you could earn some money on your own. There's one thing we learned in 2020 is that a 9 to 5 is not a guaranteed income. things can change. And again, for all the reasons I mentioned just a few minutes ago, it's very easy to start a business, whether it's e-commerce, real estate, whatever the case might be, or just investing in the market. You know, we have things like Robinhood now, and people are buying into crypto. There's just so many other things. You have to have something in addition to your 9 to 5. So I will say that, number one. Number two, there are tax advantages of having a side gig too, especially if you are earning some income from that. There's some things that potentially you could deduct that you wouldn't otherwise if you just had a 9 to 5. So I highly recommend that everybody who has a 9 to 5, and I have for many, always had a side gig in addition to that. So that's why I speak to that. And then for those folks, if you decide not to do this and have some sort of side gig, the number one thing you have to do as a 9 to 5 W-2 employee is invest in your retirement account if your employer offers one, especially if there's some matching involved, because that is free money that you would be losing out on if you don't participate in that retirement plan, number one. Number two, there are tax advantages for investing in a 401k or 403b that will help you come tax time. So that would be my advice. One, have a side gig. Two, if you're not going to do a side gig, make sure you're putting some money away for retirement through the employer plan.
Yeah, I'm 100% on your side on that. Is there's some way or another that everyone can find something they're passionate about and have
Absolutely.
it serve them rather than serving someone else's business. I mean, I just think it's a matter of not knowing where to start and maybe not it being out of your comfort zone. I think those are all things that keep people from doing that. But I think there is a place, at least in some area, that people can build that. So let's focus on that, because I don't want to encourage the bad behavior of saving for 60 years.
I'm not with that either. And you know, one thing I just want to piggyback on what you just said. I see you have the American flag behind you, and I think we all, you know, we Americans, we have that entrepreneurial spirit in us, all of us, for the most part. And it's as American as apple pie almost to want to have a business, buy a home. Those two things kind of go hand in hand. And I think from the time at a very young age with a lemonade stand, like, you know, almost all of us had some sort of business or had that, you know, that passion at an early age. And then somehow that gets lost once we get into the school system, right? We're taught to get good grades, to get into a good college so we can get a good job. And then that's kind of where it ends. But yeah, I'm a big believer in having some sort of side business and you know, going for it, as you say.
Right. And then ultimately what you're getting, like, to keep on the American thing, that's freedom, right? The freedom to be able to do with what you want with your time instead of working for somebody else. You can, you know, work for you, and eventually, I mean, you're not just going to not work, but it gives you the ability to not have to show up for somebody else. I think that's a huge part of it too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But the thing to keep in mind, Brennan, if you're going to go that route is you really have to do some planning. And by that, I mean, when you work on your own or for yourself, you don't have a retirement plan, you don't have insurance, you don't have health benefits. So really, to be considered self-employed, you got to have some of this structure in place. If not, you know, you're really owning a job and not a business. So I'll just throw that out there as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so let's dive into some of that as far as someone who's built or earning an income that's not a 9 to 5 job. For me, what I've been getting into this last year has been real estate. What are some of the things that you can hedge your bets, if you will, against taxes and, you know, maybe in the place of health insurance or things like that? What are some things that you can do, like setting up an LLC? Is there acquiring real estate? Like, what do you recommend?
Mm-hmm. It really depends. I just want to advise that anything I say here is just generic in nature, not meant to be specific financial advice. But it really depends. Like, LLC is a limited liability company, and that offers you some liability protection. That's probably the number one reason why people set these up. The other thing is it offers a lot of flexibility where you can be taxed as an S corporation, which does have tax advantages. And I don't want to get into the weeds of it because we'll bore everybody to death. But to answer your question, yeah, some of the things you can leverage are things like this, like an S corporation. Once you start making over a certain amount of money, it may make sense to be structured that way. You'll save some money on self-employment taxes. Having a retirement plan will also kill two birds with one stone, in that any money you contribute to the retirement plan, especially if you're structured, like I was saying, as an S corp, will be deductible to the business. And more importantly, you'll be saving towards retirement, so that if you decide not to continue this business in your older ages, you'd have some money to retire off of. So, you know, again, these are the kind of things that when you work for someone, these things are already in place for you. And these are some of the things that could help you if you're self-employed. And specifically in real estate, one other thing I'll mention is there's a lot of tax advantages in the real estate industry, especially if you're an investor. There's things that you can deduct as a real estate investor that a typical homeowner obviously would not be able to. So learn whatever business it is, whether it's real estate or anything else, and understand how some of these things could help you with taxes and otherwise. So that would be my advice there.
Okay, great. There's a few things I want to touch on there, and if I can just say them so you can kind of keep me on track. If we can get into a little bit about the LLCs, because I have a question about how to structure that, and then let's go through the different tax advantages through owning real estate after that. So with owning real estate, let's say you get an LLC. How many properties is best to hold under one LLC, right? Because it's to protect you from liability. So say someone sues you, and they can come after your assets that are underneath that LLC. And I've heard the owning an LLC ranges from like, and you can tell me what's more accurate, but I've heard as low as like $50 you can set up an LLC online, or it's like $1,500 a year. So at a certain point, you kind of would have to factor those numbers into how much you're making per the amount of real estate you have, and then how much does it make sense to get a new LLC? Where do you stand on that? Should you have one LLC for every house you own?
So first, I'll preface with what I'm about to say is with that every state, as in regards to LLCs. So you have to be familiar with your state laws and how they treat LLCs, number one. Number two, does it make sense to have an LLC for each property? I think it does. That's my, again, just overarching advice, because if you have if you have multiple properties in one LLC, that might not be the most advantageous thing for liability purposes, because obviously they could go after the assets in the LLC. And if you have more than one asset, well, that gives them more to go after. Should you, God forbid, be subjected to some kind of I am real estate investing people who, if they own a property in Main Street LLC, and they have that one property in that LLC, and if they have other properties, they have these other properties in individual LLCs, and depending how complex it gets, they might have them all report to a holding company, which might be structured as an S corporation, and things like that. So it really depends on how complex you want this thing to be, And I think the bigger players structure that way, where they have a holding company and multiple LLCs. And people who are just kind of flipping one house at a time, they might just have one LLC for each property.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing I wanted to ask about was the different tax advantages regarding real estate. So let's say that your real estate business has some active income like fix and flip, and then wholesale, which is mostly what I'm doing right now, is getting a discounted property under contract and assigning it to a cash buyer and taking the difference. So you're just getting a check, you don't own the asset really.
Right.
And then same thing with a fix and flip where you're just reselling it and taking the profit. And then, so you're generating this income over here. And then meanwhile, let's say you own a portfolio of rental properties, and then you're also working a W-2 job. And then, like you were saying, this isn't legal advice or whatever, but what's generally a good way to structure that so you're being the most tax effective? Are you writing off a certain amount of your active income from flipping and wholesaling with the real estate you own? And what are the advantages of owning that real estate as far as like depreciation and all that sort of topic?
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. Let's start with this, because you did say if you have, in addition to your W-2 or your 9-to-5 job, right? So you're doing this in addition to having a day job?
Yeah.
Okay, so one thing to be aware of is there are limitations on what losses you can take from rentals, let's say, right? Passive activity losses. So if you have income of 150,000 or more, you do not get to take any losses from your rental income. Let's say it generated a loss, which sometimes it does, because in real estate, you get to deduct a lot of expenses on a Schedule E, such as maintenance of the home, improvements, mortgage interest, property taxes, and depreciation, which you mentioned. Depreciation basically is a expense that's allowed by the IRS for real estate investors, and it's an expense that you literally do not come out of pocket for. They let you, over a period of time, in the case of residential real estate over 27.5 years, deduct the cost of the rental. So yeah, when you add all these things up, it could generate a loss. And let's say you have a 9-to-5 job where you make, let's just say 100,000, just picking a number off a bus here, and you had a $10,000 loss from the real estate. Yes, it would be allowed in that situation. So you would only be taxed on 90 instead of 100, using that example. But let's say you made $151,000 and you had a $10,000 loss, you would not be able to take that loss because that's kind of the threshold where these losses are disallowed, the passive activity losses. Doesn't mean it's gone forever. You would get a credit for it when you sold the property, but you wouldn't be able to take it in that current year.
Okay. So I interviewed a guy on here a while ago, a few months back, and he owns like 3,000 units or something. And he does advanced depreciation. So he'll take one property and use all of the depreciation. So he's to not pay any taxes. And then he'll just kind of like move that forward into the next year or something. Does that make sense, or am I misunderstanding that?
No, there are certain things that you could depreciate all in 1 year. It's called a Section 179 deduction or depreciation, where rather than depreciating it over time, you just kind of depreciate it all at once. To my knowledge, you can't do that with real estate since 1986, I believe. So I don't know if he was talking about a commercial property or something else. I mean, there's so many things out there. I do not profess to know it. Yeah, I do not profess to know everything, believe me. I know enough to make me dangerous, but but I don't know if that what he was referring to. So I don't want to speak specifically to that.
Okay.
But one other thing I want to mention is when it comes to these losses, if you are a professional, if you're a real estate professional, meaning that this is what you do for your living and you don't have any other income, you can take these loans a year up to 25,000 a year. And in order to be considered a real estate professional, I think you have to work at least 750 hours as a real estate professional. Does not mean you have to be licensed, by the way. Just do is flip houses or own houses. And you have no other occupation. So this is your primary occupation. Then you would be considered a real estate professional, and there are some advantages to that as well. Too many to get into, in this discussion, but there are a lot of advantages to being in the real estate industry, needless to say. But I will say this, there is a thing out there called depreciation recapture. So even though you do take this depreciation over time, if and when you sell this property, you have to recapture some of this. It basically lowers your cost basis, and there are some taxes that will be due as a result of having that depreciation while you own the property.
So wait, so with the depreciation recapture, it's you're paying taxes because of the depreciation that you didn't end up using? Is that what I'm hearing?
No. Let's say you bought a house that was, I'm trying to think of an easy number here, 275,000. They let you depreciate that over 27 and a half years, which means you can depreciate 10,000 a year for 27 and a half years, if I'm doing my math right. So let's say you depreciated this thing over 10 years or so, that would be 100,000. Depending what you sold it for, if your gain was less than your appreciation, you would have to recapture some of that depreciation. So it's a little complex, but just know that there's a thing out there called depreciation recapture. And I literally made a video about it just today. It's on my Instagram page if you want to get into the weeds of that a little bit. And I go through an example. I don't want to bore people here, and I don't have a whiteboard behind me where I could actually show some figures, but just know that when it comes to rental real estate, you do get to depreciate this year after year. That's an advantage and a benefit, but there is a recapture that has to take place most times when you sell the property.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And then also, I'm going to put your Instagram in the notes so then people can go check that out, because there is a lot of good information on there. I've been going
Thank you.
Seeing some of that. There's some really good advice. A lot of people on Instagram will just put the start of it to get you in, and then they want you to go do something else. I'm finding a lot of yours are just like the facts, and it's just good information. So definitely go give you a follow, whoever's listening.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Of course. So just to kind of finish up the real estate part of it. So let's say you're a real estate professional. How do these guys end up paying like $0 in taxes at the end of the year?
Depreciation is a big one. Having carryover losses is another. I mean, it goes on. And honestly, having the best attorneys and accountants that money could buy also help in this regard, because they find every loophole possible. But I would say, in a nutshell, depreciation plays a big part. Capital expenses play a big part. Improvements and things like this, in addition to carryover losses from previous properties or other investments, could negate having any tax due or very little tax due in some cases. And of course, there have been a number of high profile people who have been accused of not paying taxes. Not always the case. It's just that sometimes what happens is they pay themselves in stock, or they take out loans against stock they may own in real estate companies and holding companies. So it's just, again, too long to get into here, but there are a number of advantages to that, and they leverage every loophole possible to limit or eliminate any tax they may have.
Yeah, definitely seems like there's just so much information out there about how to be the most effective with your taxes, and you can get so into the weeds with that, just as far as, like you were saying, hiring someone who just finds every little loophole in the tax code. And I think, yeah, that's probably what's going on there a lot of the time. So yeah, definitely really interesting, and worth, I think once you get to that point, it's worth hiring someone like you or someone like that to, you know, definitely stay legal, but to be able to be the most advantageous with it.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And you know, and that's why I'm just kind of on a superficial level going over this, because I don't want to say anything that might be misconstrued as specific advice for somebody, or hey, there's this thing I heard this guy say. Everybody's situation is different, you know, and obviously, just out the chances of you paying little to no taxes just because you have a rental property or you flipped a house are pretty low. But if this becomes your primary occupation or your primary business or your sole source of income, yeah, there are ways to leverage the tax code to minimize the taxes you owe, or eliminate it altogether.
Sweet. All right. Another thing I wanted to touch on, you mentioned that you've done some investing in the stock market. That might seem daunting to some people who aren't in the space or don't really even know where to go for that. What do you say to someone who wants to invest in the stock market? Do you think that it's just studying different companies and being you know, like a growth investor? Would you say the index funds? Where do you stand with stocks?
Yeah, so for most people, I find that mutual funds are the best way to do it and get started. Now, that's not to say that if you like a particular company or you're knowledgeable about a particular company that you can't invest in individual stocks. But by and large, I find that most people get overwhelmed with that, or they get consumed with that. So for a majority of people, the masses, investing through your retirement plan at work, usually the underlying investment is mutual funds. And index funds are great for that, because then you're buying a basket of stocks, not just individual stocks. And they could be actively managed mutual funds or index funds, which are not managed at all, and everywhere in between. And you have every asset class. You could invest here in the US, you could invest overseas, you could be in growth, technology, healthcare, financials. And it's nice to know, and it's easier for me to explain to some of my clients about sectors and asset classes and buying baskets of stocks rather than trying to track every little one. And not to mention the diversification advantages of investing in mutual funds is greater than individual stocks. But with that said, you know, if you have a stock like Apple that you may have bought 30 years ago, obviously your rate of return would be much higher than if you owned an index fund. So I will say that's true too. But there's nothing wrong with having a mix of the two, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and I think one of the probably got to be the most underlying important thing is being in the market in some shape or form. Like, is putting your money in a savings account really even an option anymore for people?
Not for me, it isn't. You know, and I just spoke with somebody today who's he's a young man. He opened up a retirement account, and he says he just has it in cash for now because you know, he was concerned about taking on any risk in the market. And my response to that was, well, just having it in cash is a bigger risk than having it in the market, because whatever the rate of return is on a cash account right now, I can't imagine it being much, if anything at all. Inflation is going up, and it's eating away at any guaranteed rate of return that he might be getting on an account like that. And especially being young, I said, you know, the market's always going to do its thing, right? It goes up, it goes down. But over the years, historically, it's always been on an upward trend. So you can't go, well, I don't want to say you can't go wrong with that, but you know, your chances are greater with that than just sitting on cash or you know, something equivalent to that.
Yeah. And then on top of that, can you explain the concept of compounding interest and how magical that is?
Yeah, I mean, think of it as like a snowball, right? Where you could have a small snowball and you're on the top of a mountain and you roll this thing down. By the time down to the bottom, it's just accumulated into a boulder. And there are many websites and many calculators out there, and I encourage people to into some of these tools and resources. And if you're not familiar with compound interest, it basically is you put in an investment, whether it's $1,000 or $10,000, doesn't matter which. If you have a rate of return of 10%, obviously that grows to a greater number. And now if you have interest the next year and the year after and the year after, it literally is compounding. And as this account gets bigger, and it takes years to get to this point, guys. So I don't want to make it sound like it's something that happens over a short period of time. In order for compounding to really work its magic, it takes some time to accumulate and have this account grow. And I also encourage people to consistently invest, regardless of market conditions, especially the younger investors like yourself, Brennan, right? Don't worry about if the market's at an all-time high or an all-time low. Just, especially when we're talking retirement accounts, this is money that's earmarked for maybe 25, 35 years from now. Just let the market do its thing, put the money in, and the compounding, I think it was Albert Einstein said, is the eighth wonder of the world. So look into some tools, play around with it, and see what, you know, how an investment will appreciate over time with compound interest.
I think that's fantastic advice. I appreciate you saying all that, because that's something that can really help someone who's just getting started, you know, just having something in there. Because I mean, if, yeah, like you're saying, if you use those tools, you go on and just see like what would happen. If you gave your kid when he's 15, $1,000, and then he takes it out when he's 65 and a half or whatever it is, that grows a lot. Like it's just insane.
Yeah, it's insane. It's insane. And, you know, I really should memorize some of these examples because there's so many of them out there. Like, hey, if you just put away $100 a month for 30 years, it grows to be X amount, you know, given a average 10% rate of return of, let's say, the S&P 500. Or if you invest in and I often quote this, although again, not using specific numbers, but you could take a young investor like yourself at 23 years old who starts investing and you just put money in there, let's say for 10 or 15 years and stop. And then somebody comes along and they start in their 30s or 40s and they're like putting in double the amount on a monthly basis than you did. And they do that for a longer duration. You would wind up with more money than somebody who started later in the game. And the reason for that is the compounding. So again, not getting into specific numbers, that's the general concept.
Yeah, man, that's huge. That's it's got to be one of the building blocks of financial success, is utilizing that.
It is. It really is. And there are people who, if you think about how people accumulate wealth, most of us, and I'm talking about just, you know, average hardworking people like ourselves, is through home ownership, not necessarily they live there, probably over 600,000 now. So that's one way people accumulate wealth, and through retirement plans, through employers or pensions, in addition to retirement plans like a 401k. They just, you know, didn't even think about it, just had a small amount taken out of their paycheck every week, And then 30 years later, it was a nest egg in addition to their pension, Social Security. Now they're home appreciated. So it's all of these things. It's not just any one thing that does it. So I definitely suggest that everybody, spread their money around a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Well, kind of wrapping things up here. There's a few questions I always like to ask. This is the Get Wealth podcast. First off, actually, what's a book you recommend for people to read?
Oh, wow. So a book I recommend is a book I'm reading right now. I mean, you can see behind me, I have these bookshelves. It's not just for show. I actually read some of these books, but a book that I'm reading now and that I enjoy, I mean, there's always the staples, right? Rich Dad, Poor Dad is one I recommend, highly, by Robert Kiyosaki. I think everybody's heard of that book. Another book I recommend that for some reason doesn't get as much, is not recommended as much, is The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. The E-Myth is, the E in E-Myth stands for entrepreneur. And he talks about systems that entrepreneurs should have in place in order to grow their businesses. I definitely recommend the E-Myth. I think the book is as good or better than Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And then I'm currently reading Your Next 5 Moves by Bet David. I don't know if you can see that, but this is a book I'm enjoying now.
Wait, can you say that? It kind of cut out for me. I don't know if it'll show up on the recording, but just for me.
Sure.
The 5 what?
It's called Your Next 5 Moves by Patrick Bet David. Yeah. So that's why I held it up. I didn't know if I would cut out or not, but and I'm not sure if you could see that. But that's
now it's good. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
All right, that's great. I'm gonna read all those.
Okay.
And then I've read Rich Dad Poor Dad, but the other two I've not read those, and I'd always love to hear about new books.
Yep.
Lastly, because the Get Wealth podcast, what is your definition of wealth?
My definition of wealth is having options with your time. I know people who are wealthy in the financial sense, but they have no time for themselves, their family, their hobbies, their interests. I'm a big believer in trying to maintain a balanced life. So for me, it's not necessarily being financially wealthy, but being wealthy in life and having some options with your time. So everybody has different, and that's something that they speak. Patrick Bet David speaks to in this book I just recommended. Your 5 Next Moves is, there are some people out there who want to be ultra wealthy and have all the trappings of being financially wealthy, and I'm not in that category at all. I just want to have enough money to live very comfortably and have some options. If I want to take a vacation or 2 or 3 a year, I could do that. That's great. If I want to go out to dinner every week, I can. These are just little things that I like to do. So having options, I guess, is what I would consider being wealthy.
I agree. I think that's a fantastic answer, and that's at least part of the definition that everyone should have. Maybe someone else has something else that's included in there, but I for sure think that what you were saying rings true to everybody. I think you're a good example of that anybody can do it if you just take the simple steps and get started. So
yes.
I really appreciate all the good advice and coming on the show today, man. It's been a blast.
Likewise. Thank you so much again for having me. It's been an honor, and I really appreciate spending the time with you, and I enjoyed this conversation very much.
That's amazing. Where can people find you? Instagram, websites, all that stuff?
Yeah, so my website is navigatorfinancialinc.com, but I would recommend that people don't go there only because it's just a landing page for the most part. If you want to keep up with some of the content that I provide, I would recommend Instagram. I'm on Instagram. You could find me at Lou Soriano CFP, as in certified financial planner. So Lou Soriano CFP. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook. I have a YouTube channel with some videos on there as well. So pretty
You just cut out. Are you there?
I'm
Oh,
here.
there you are.
Yep.
Oh, cool.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, bad connection today, but and then I'll plug all that in the description so people can look at that and see all those links. So, alrighty.
Awesome.
Lou Soriano, everybody, get wealthy.
Thank you.
Thanks.